Hey everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil 51.2. We are mere days away from our 1 year anniversary of the Free Assange Vigil series, and I can't freaking believe that. Um, I am Steve Poikinen. I am joined this morning by my co-host Andrew Smith and our guests Mark Lubers and Sean O'Brien, and I will get to that in a moment. But first, let's run down some numbers. Today marks 3,490 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange. 443 days since the WikiLeaks publisher was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the UK for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 72 days until the second phase of Julian's show trial and rendition hearing. And that's an important number, and we will get to that in a second as well. 1,120 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. On the plus side, Chelsea Manning is enjoying her 106th day of freedom. About that 72 days until the hearings in September, Action for Assange is crowdfunding to get back to Washington, D.C. for all 3 of those weeks. We do have a GoFundMe up for that. If you can, please donate. If you can't, we get it, but please share that link. It is incredibly helpful that link gets out. And yeah, let's jump right into it. There was an indictment, a superseding indictment that came out this week, relating directly to the case against Julian Assange. And when you read the indictment, it sounds like you're standing in line at the supermarket and you picked up the trashiest tabloid that you can possibly find right by the checkout stand, and you started thumbing through it because it is salacious, it is full of bullshit and lies, and it is a complete distortion of history. There's an attempt in the indictment to basically make Julian Assange the mastermind of Anonymous and LulzSec and AntiSec, and it's been nearly a decade since LulzSec was on anyone's lips. So we thought, who better to break down what LulzSec and AntiSec are than Mark Lubers, who is a known quantity in the world of Anonymous. And while all of this is going on, there's been a push to ramp up the efforts to kill encryption. And that is primarily why Sean O'Brien is here, because he's who we go to with every single one of our questions about that, which I'm sure is irritating as shit. But let's jump right into this. Mark, if you could take us back to 2011, 2012, and I would invite everyone in the audience to try and put your mind back nearly a decade to where the culture of the internet was in 2011 and 2012. And Mark, if you could sort of walk us through that period of time where LulzSec was originated, who Sabu was, who Siggy Thurtson is, and what's really going on here.
Okay, well, as you guys know, Anonymous has historically been a decentralized collective, but around those years, 2010, 2011, more important became a location called Anonops, an IRC server, and there were different hacking groups, so to speak, active on there. Many of the collective was active on there, and so that included people who later on in May 2012 formed LulzSec, and LulzSec was just like a different team of of hackers. I'm not sure if I should mention all their members, but the most eventually all got arrested except for one guy, AV Unit. He was never arrested, and the most famous one, I guess, in a good way, was Anarchaeus, alias Jeremy Hammond, right? And the most famous one in a bad way was Sabu, back then called Anonymous Abu, and later on Sabu. And yeah, they became very known in anonymous culture because during a super short period of time, they were involved in some very high level hacks and some very high level exposing of things. And the rest of the community was like a part of it was part of the community was doubtful about it because it went so fast and they did such impressive things that we thought like what's going on here. And the other part of it was totally happy with it, right? I mean, like finally, like a lot of media attention, a lot of strong action against the establishment and like the corrupt organizations. But yeah, later we all found out that yes, Sabu, the one who was trying to take the most fame for things, was an FBI informant. And if you read in the indictment against Assange, then you already can see that Sabu was arrested. It says June 7th, before the whole process of supposedly communicating with Assange began. And even before starting the whole anti-SEC operation or movement, because that is one little mistake that is in the indictment, that anti-SEC was not a team, right? Anti-SEC was an operation where like many teams were involved with it, leak as many things as you can and disable security and these things. Just like a big movement, different hacking crews. So what we can see in the indictment, at least, is that we know that from the start, or even before any communication, even before anything happened, Sabu was already working with the FBI. So, and I think that's crucial to mention because it means that I'm not sure how the US law works with that, but even if anything happened, like I discussed it with friends in Europe, and we said like, okay, this is at least a clear case of entrapment then.
Crap, dead air. Hang on. Let me fix that. So here's what I dug up on U.S. entrapment law. There's two parts of it. Part one is you have to prove that it was the government that was committing the crime before it can legally be defined as entrapment. In this case, there is direct and hard evidence that the FBI was the culprit in these hacks, in that people were being used and basically like led by the nose by the FBI, coerced into committing these hacks. The second part of entrapment, which is going to be a little bit harder for the defense team to prove, is that the person who was being used had no previous criminal history, no ties with any organizations that committed acts of crime. And in that case, at least in Julian's case, it's going to be a little bit rougher road, because there was some time spent in Australia for computer intrusion. And there's the nature of WikiLeaks in general is to receive documents that may or may not have been obtained extra legally. So I don't know if you have to prove both parts. One, clear cut and very simple. Yes, the FBI was the organization that encouraged not just the hacking of Stratfor, but all of the hacks that subsequently took place afterwards. Sean, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because you've done a little bit of studying up on it, and you were, at least around and active on the internet when this was happening. So I kind of want to get your take as well.
Sure. Well, as everybody's saying, or everybody here is saying, it's a pretty transparent attempt to tie Julian to issues that he basically has nothing to do with. Whether or not these things could be considered entrapment, I think, that case is going to be hard to make. Traditionally, the FBI is able to do pretty much whatever it wants in investigations. We've seen that again and again, especially when we're talking about technology. So, for example, there have been a number of cases where FBI has undermined Tor or the Tor browser, which is an anonymity technology, right? To catch people. They've hosted, child pornography servers, in some cases, by some estimates, being the largest hosts of that material, to basically entrap people. And whatever one thinks about catching pedophiles, obviously, most 99.99% of people, think pedophilia is wrong. It doesn't mean that the FBI should be doing this stuff, right? There was an FBI sting recently in Mexico with sex workers, right? Where the FBI itself, their undercover agents were participating in the sex acts with the sex workers. And that still didn't completely derail the charges against folks, although some of that was dropped. But long story short, we're talking about the last few years, right? You go back in history and you look at COINTELPRO and all these things. The FBI is going to get around the entrapment part. Where Anonymous is concerned, where LulzSec is concerned, look, that was almost a decade ago. And it was a time period when we started having real, what people now call hacktivism. Folks passionate about certain issues, being able to do things like a denial of service attack or a DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, and do it for reasons of political action, free speech, and so on. So you bring down a web server and you're making a point with that. LulzSec is a little different in their approach, to put it mildly, and I'm sure Mark is happy to talk about that. But they do it for the lulz, right? So primarily. I still think there's something of a political action there too. All of this has very little, if nothing, to do with the type of mission, the type of movement that Assange has been a part of his entire life, or at least his entire internet-based life, which has to do with transparency of information, right? WikiLeaks was founded on principles of democracy, right? Transparency for the powerful, right? And those kinds of issues have, barely any resemblance to the kinds of things that Anonymous and LulzSec were doing. It's obvious here, and I joked about it a little bit on Twitter, that they're throwing whatever they can at the wall. They're trying to blame Assange like he's some kind of supervillain, because it's a long time ago in internet life, and this has all been shrouded anyway. A lot of it's gone down the memory hole. It's very easy to, toss these accusations at Julian. And it's not dissimilar to what was in the last indictment, right? Where they were making outlandish claims that the sharing of a hashed password, right? Hashed information, meaning obfuscated information, just the sharing of that information and talking about the possibility of cracking it, right? That was the action that led to supposedly a conspiracy, right? So I think, the Justice Department is trying what they can. I also think what's interesting about the shift to talking about Anonymous and LulzSec is that we will likely see, in my opinion, groups at least calling themselves anonymous, doing political actions now. Around the big anti-racist movements we have going, Black Lives Matter, et cetera. And, it's now a global movement.
That's actually a point that I wanted to bring up to talk about for a second, to get your and Mark's opinion on, Sean. Because the way I see it, whether this did or didn't happen, Sabu was an FBI informant. The whole thing's bullshit to begin with. But I think trying to put Julian and Anonymous in the same sentence together in people's conversations and on people's feeds, what it does is, in a moment like this where Anonymous is acting in solidarity with the anti-racist, anti-police brutality, anti-tyranny protesters, It's a way to try to smear Anonymous by using the 10-year-long propaganda campaign that's been used by Julian, or used against Julian, to where the rape charges and all that, people will see Anonymous and then they'll see associated with Julian. And if they're not well informed, or if they're heavily propagandized, they'll put those two together. And instead of thinking Anonymous, the anti-racist fighters that are trying to stop the expansion of a global police state, they'll think, oh, they're led by a rapist. So to me, it's a way more so than indicting Julian on another bullshit charge, which I don't even think that they can do at this point. It's a way to smear the name Anonymous with the pre-existing propaganda that existed around Julian's name.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty astute observation. That is sort of, the more that I think about it, it seems to make more sense that what's going on is exactly that, right? And of course, if the prosecution of Julian is successful, right, if they're able to, get him to the United States, throw him in a pen, et cetera, that's going to make it much easier for them to prosecute whoever arises, Anonymous related or not, who does the kinds of political act that Anonymous does do, which is, bringing down servers and that sort of thing. So yeah, I do see that dimension of it. I also kind of feel that the other indictment fell flat, and that the involvement of Chelsea Manning, especially because she was unwilling, right, to play ball, and willing, of course, to sacrifice her health, her freedom, for I don't even remember how many days. I know you said at the top of the show, I'm sorry, but a very long time. The fact that she was willing to do all that means that was kind of a weaker case. It may just be that the DOJ thinks they can do this, so therefore they will. I don't know.
I have a kind of like double part question here, and I'm hoping that Mark can help set it straight. But to your point, Sean, they had to dismiss that 10-year long grand jury. And we know from a couple of WikiLeaks posts from 2019 that this indictment that just came out was already like on the back burner. It was ready to go. And what it's meant, and it's exactly what we've been talking about, it's just meant to obfuscate and further smear. But because Chelsea Manning refused to break, and because Jeremy Hammond has refused to break, and both of whom have put out incredible statements on the nature of grand juries and just how they feel about it. Hammond's in particular includes my favorite new phrase, the megalomaniacal pig whims of government entities. Because of that, they've now got to, reach down into the septic tank and pull up Sabu and pull up Siggy and be like, but we've got these two snitches right here who, we're totally acting on our orders completely illegally to, urge people to commit crimes on behalf of the FBI. And that's their go-to. That's what they're left with. Is we've got Snitch 1 and Snitch 2 who had questionable character before they ever touched a computer. In Siggy's case, he was touching children way before he was touching a computer. And that's their star witness now. It is insane. And to the point about Anonymous helping out people who have been protesting, who have been trying to stand up over, extrajudicial police murder and exactly what they have going on. Mark, I've been asked a number of times now if the people who are saying we are anonymous are the same people who were saying we are anonymous then. And my understanding is if you are in favor of anonymity in the digital space for private citizens, you are anonymous. There's no test you have to take. There's no handshake you have to learn. But I think it would ease some of the minds of the curious if they knew that some of the more established anons were still participating in these ops.
Okay, see, that's the perfect point you're making. That anonymous tactic is not a group. Like it doesn't have members or leaders. Like the idea of anonymity is a method of protest, right? It is a way to keep you safe and also at the same time amplify you if you do something. If other anons see you're using these hashtags or using similar symbolism, and in that way we are amplifying each other, but technically it is just a method of protest. So, and that is what is important in this indictment too. They're not actually talking about Anonymous working with WikiLeaks. They're talking about one little group of people, LulzSec, communicated with WikiLeaks. And you're talking about, like, if you're talking about Anonymous or the idea of anonymity, you're talking about millions of people worldwide in all kinds of countries. Some anons on the street aren't even interested in U.S. Politics or whatever goes on there, right? It is just they're doing their own things to fight against local corruption, against their abuse by their governments or big corporations, and that is the thing. And about the whole Black Lives Matter situation in the USA, yeah. Historically, anonymous activists help amplify people who need it, right? People who need a voice to speak out. You can. There are many anons working in solidarity with such movements in the USA, and they just feel like these people need a voice, and we can help them speak out, and we can amplify them. Definitely. You were asking if all the anons are still involved today. Yes, they are. There are many anons still involved from the early days. Myself back then during Operation Payback, I'm not going to put anything illegal on my back, but I did help set up mirrors for WikiLeaks, right? I don't know if people remember this or were around back then. The WikiLeaks site was actually being attacked by huge denial of service attacks by the USA mainly, we assume, and so it was necessary for people to set up mirrors for WikiLeaks. At least this was the idea, so the website couldn't be taken down. So what WikiLeaks did was they made available a backup of the site, the entire site, and everyone who wanted to help could just set up their own mirror for the site. So many of us did this, and I think you can still find a list of mirrors. It's a few thousand mirrors eventually were set up for WikiLeaks, and so it was it was impossible to take it down anymore, right? By anyone. It became decentralized, so to speak, and that was actually one of the powers of Anonymous and of decentralized activism. And WikiLeaks chose that way of moving too, and that is a very important point to make, that the concept of anonymity is the actual idea, and that's what also is the statement of many anonymous activists. Like, this idea makes you bulletproof, right? Because if you are anonymous, then people can't, if they don't know who you are, they can't arrest you, they can't intimidate you, they can't harass your family or whatever. But it is also a thing with WikiLeaks, if you are submitting data as you're a source for materials, it is in most cases necessary to stay anonymous. And
well, look, I'm going to jump in here for a second real quick, Mark. I apologize for interrupting. But if you right now, and Glenn Greenwald was making this point yesterday, right now, if you go to the Washington Post or you go to the New York Times, they have a section on their website for how you can leak material to them securely and anonymously. So the idea that only hackers or only bad guys or only criminals want to be anonymous is absolute garbage. Like, right, the paper of record, right? The Gray Lady, the New York Times, the most trusted name in news, wants you to leak to securely because source protection is still a right that is granted to journalists. And that is ultimately one of the things that the U.S. government is trying to take away from us, is source protection. Also happens to be one of the credos for WikiLeaks. They're trying to murder investigative journalism in broad daylight in front of billions of witnesses. And we are all witnesses to this. So it's up to us to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to let you murder investigative journalism.
Yeah, and this also goes into what Sean already was saying about the Tor network, which is actually it's a very similar story. I mean, the idea of anonymity with anonymous is of course something everyone can use, and there is not any rule you have to follow on that. And the same thing actually applies to Tor. And like there are people in war zones, there are people in difficult situations who actually need a system like Tor to stay anonymous when they bring information into the public. They actually need to stay safe. Think about countries like Myanmar or whatever. And what the governments have been trying, and also like the mainstream media, they have been painting Tor, for example, as being some system used by pedophiles and sex abusers, and that's the thing. They've been trying to paint it like that to actually attempt to de-anonymize people, but actually it's used by such different people, and there are so many legitimate activists and journalists using this to stay safe. And at this quote I used in the past, saying, you do not make cars illegal just because a pedophile can abduct a child with it, right? This is just not how it works. We actually need this car to travel safely in our case, and so we can't do that. And with Anonymous specifically, now what they're trying to do with this indictment is paint it like, okay, so Anonymous worked with Assange. Well, actually, just a few people are, according to the indictment, we're working with Assange. But no, Anonymous is everyone, right? And that's the thing I really want to mention.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. In my view, and maybe I just feel philosophical today, but really what we're talking about here is folks who are trying to bring back some of the features of the internet that we've lost, right? Anonymity being one of them. Mass, distributed democratic actions being another one. Transparency being another one. And you look at groups like Pirate Bay and so on, access to information, sharing of media, and so on. One of the issues is because all of these movements are connected tangentially in some way, right? So you brought up Operation Payback. Well, I know there were copies of WikiLeaks' archive on Pirate Bay, right? That was one of the primary way people were downloading, right? So I'm waiting for an indictment that gets, Julian on copyright charges or something. There's that possibility always, unfortunately, for people who are involved in these types of actions or involved in these internet freedom movements, whichever wing they're in, to be associated with some, BS indictment, some conspiracy, theory that the Justice Department comes up with in the U.S. And that's part of the reason, we really need to get rid of the power for the DOJ to do this stuff anyway. And unfortunately, their power is being expanded in a number of different ways instead. So,
yeah. Before we dive into the next article, Sean, do you want to talk a little bit and kind of preface what the Earn It Act is and the situation we're in facing it right now?
Yeah. So Earn It, or Earn IT, I keep calling it, but it's an act that came through in March. Early March, and has languished a little bit since it was introduced into the Senate during the whole beginning of the pandemic crisis in the U.S. Now, Earn It has a specific methods of control outlined in it, which are a committee that the Attorney General is in charge of, right? And the Attorney General in the U.S. decides who's on this committee, handpicks them, and then that committee decides what are best practices, right, for intermediaries. So the Googles, the Facebooks, etc., but also the Wikipedias, the small forums, the Sean book, if I make a website, right? what the intermediaries are allowed to do, basically. And Section 230, which is part of an old bill, but it's basically a two-line. I don't want to call it an immunity clause. Some people call it that, but it outlines the ways in which providers of both internet connections, right, like ISPs and so on, and forums on the web and other intermediaries like what we now call social media. It outlines the ways in which they are protected from the liability, right, of their user's speech, aka what the user posts, the videos they stream, the conversations they're having over a chat protocol, right? And Section 230 under EarnIT would have this thing tacked onto it, which would be this group of people who come up with these best practices and selectively give, right, that waiver of liability, right, immunity, if we want to call it that, to certain providers. So if EarnIT gets passed, you can see a Google, right, following these best practices, right, and a, Sean's version of Google not doing it. And then Sean's version of Google either gets shut down, I could get prosecuted, I could end up who knows what. And Google would still be able to go on and do what it does. So it's a way of centralizing control of information at its heart. It's a way of censoring, of course. I mean, that's the best practices, of course. But more essentially, I think, and more, sort of the scary part of it, is that it would require the intermediaries to see the contents of chats, the contents of posts, the media that's being transferred over these intermediaries, over these networks, right? And if you need to moderate and you have to look at your user content, then de facto, you can't have strong encryption, right? You can't have what we call end-to-end encryption. You have to have some sort of backdoor in there. So EarnIT did not mention encryption at all, but the current update to that bill, which we can get to, it's a separate bill, but it does the exact opposite. So we basically have a two-pronged attack where one bill is sort of looking at the regulatory model, or at least the moderation aspects, and attacking encryption in a de facto sort of way. And then the other one is attacking encryption in a de jure, by law sort of way. And we can go into that.
We actually can go into that because it's in our show doc for today. Josh, if you could go ahead and pull it, and then I want to circle back after we go through this and pull up Kevin Gastola's thread. But this is the Sputnik one, correct? Or am I tripping? So let me pull that up as well. God damn it.
And before I do a deep dive into this, Mark, what's your opinion of this? Have you looked at what's going on in the US right now, RE encryption and our regulatory sort of push against it? Maybe. Oh, is he muted?
Sorry, I have myself muted for you. No, I have been looking into it because in the European Union we've been dealing with similar issues. Early 2019 with the whole thing we call the ACTA 2 law, the copyright directive. They started with similar things in here. They're now doing a TERAC thing, anti-terrorism filter, so to speak. It is interesting that it's happening at the same time, right? And it goes into the whole single market strategy that they want the same things for the USA as for the European Union. And it probably has to do with, like, if US companies or US users are affected by this, they want the same in the European Union. They don't want like an advantage on the market to one side. So they're doing it everywhere at the same time. And I'm glad you guys are like standing up against this, because until now we failed in Europe to stand up against this. And
we are always going to rail against this. There's got to be the same kind of energy that went into stopping SOPA and stopping even the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's got to be that collective post-partisan energy that and Sean and I have talked about this a number of times, that people are just so used to there's an entire generation that doesn't know what the internet was like even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. They're just conditioned to, okay, well, they're going to see everything we're doing anyway, so we're just not going to care. And fuck that. That's that. I don't know how to say it nicely. Like it goes back to the core principles of Anonymous, in that anyone who would like privacy in the digital space is anonymous. It goes back to the fight that Aaron Schwartz led and was assassinated for. And I do want to touch on a couple of quotes in this Sputnik article, just to kind of reiterate that Billy Barr, the Attorney General, for anyone who may be believing the Q narrative that Barr is some kind of white hat here to save us, here's Barr in his own words. While strong encryption provides enormous benefits to society and is undoubtedly necessary for the security and privacy of Americans, end-to-end encryption technology is being abused by child predators, terrorists, drug traffickers, and even hackers to perpetrate their crimes and avoid detection. That is a conflation by Billy Barr that anyone who would want to use end-to-end encryption is de facto a criminal. And that is simply not the case. And that is one thing that we really need to push back on.
I mean,
Right.
You see the same language in the Internet Act, where that's what this is for, is we're stopping child pornography on the internet. When, like Sean had pointed out, it's our fucking United States government that puts the child pornography there to fucking begin with. So if you want to stop those issues, stop the system that's actively putting more child pornography out there than any other group combined.
Right, and I think it's worth saying as well, groups like Anonymous, right, are the kinds of groups that have been able to stop, atrocious shit on the internet through collective action. And whenever one thinks of things like this, actions on the Church of Scientology and so on, those kinds of things are traditionally, what a group like Anonymous would do. So there are other ways of approaching it than just saying, hey, the feds need to just, take this over and be the one that is investigating the quote unquote dark web for us. At any rate, there's more atrocious crap on the clear web right now than there is on the dark web. It's definitely, just quantity wise, but also, it seems like cyber criminals are moving there to the clear web more and more. There's been a lot of really good studies of content on the dark web in the last couple years. Most of them, of course, have some inconclusiveness to them, right? But the majority of the content that is found seems to be just very basic internet forums, file sharing, information sharing, chat, and then a lot of it's ephemeral. So it's, it's a temporary room to have a conversation, and then it goes away. So those kinds of, things are what we need the dark web for, and something that need to be preserved, definitely. So.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of demonization in that term dark web, where all it is essentially an anonymous zone. Like, it's a zone that provides you a level of separation from the outside influences of technology to have conversations or exchange information. What you choose to use that for is up to you. It's the same argument that's made about literally everything. Like, okay, is this tool dangerous, or is it the person that's using it for something that is?
And we had these debates in the early internet, right? The internet itself was considered, a terrible thing, where who the hell knows if you can go buy a gun or whatever it was, whatever the arguments were in the early days. And, properly, as you say, the dark web's kind of a bad term, but it's here to stay as far as I can tell. There's a number of Tor project devs who say, let's just call it the more private web. Fine, it is. But the level of privacy that we get from Tor, the level of privacy that we get from strong encryption are more or less the same. And often the code and the stuff that's really running these technologies is shared infrastructure, basically shared software, shared servers a lot of times, and so on. So yeah. On the subject of Bill Barr, I try not to make it too much about a personal, fight, but he is the probably the worst attorney general yet, as far as trying to fight encryption. There's no doubt about that. It's not just the quote, from Sputnik. It's also tons of other quotes he's done in the past. He's made it quite clear that he wants tech companies to fall in line, quote unquote. I think a lot of what Trump is doing when he's talking about social media falling in line is basically a power struggle where Trump's trying to take power away from liberal elites who control certain aspects of the information system and then sort of put it under this draconian framework of control where there's nothing encrypted, everything can be spied on, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't look good, and there's a number of ways that it's being attacked. Before I forget, and I don't want to dominate too much at this second, but we talked a little bit about Secure Drop tangentially, which is the technology that more mainstream outlets use to have leaks submitted to them. Secure Drop was originally designed by Aaron Schwartz, so it's worth noting that first off. And second off, it is very much true that all these newspapers had to change the way that they do reporting. They had to do that because leaks became a powerful force in the information system, and those leaks became a powerful force in the information system precisely because of WikiLeaks, right? So, I mean, WikiLeaks really did change the way journalism is done. So then you had the New York Times and all these other outlets, use this thing called Secure Drop, which is not identical to what WikiLeaks uses for submission, but uses some of the same technologies like Tor to get information. I don't know if I would trust the New York Times' Secure Drop implementation for anybody who's thinking about doing that. They had someone on staff, Runa Sandvik, who's awesome and does a lot of good work. And unfortunately, she was laid off. I think some other folks were laid off, and the situation was just not good. So we may also want to reevaluate at this moment when there is such a shift economically and also in the world of journalism, who we give leaks to. Not that I should have to say that in a WikiLeaks stream.
Avoid giving leaks to the Intercept. This is I'm going to be releasing a bunch of ASMR type stuff, and I do think I'm going to do one about sharing information with the Intercept.
There you go.
So just to remind people a little bit before we move into the second half about what's happening with William Barr right now. He just fired the person that was performing a relatively mundane investigation on him for like his use of, I believe it was personal funds, but also for his involvement in war crimes, I believe. The International Criminal Court is investigating William Barr right now, and he has personally put out the statement saying that they are sanctioning the International Criminal Court and they will be targeting members of the International Criminal Court and their families for investigating the U.S.'s involvement in war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's an important thing to note about him. William Barr is the gentleman who worked hand in hand with someone named Robert Mueller. I don't know if people know who that is. To cover up the Iran-Contra banking scandal with the BCCI, which I believe was the Bank of Credit and something International. And what that bank was literally the bank that was being used to launder money to commit genocide around the world, launder drug money. And William Barr and Robert Mueller worked hand in hand to cover up those genocides, or the money laundered for the genocide in Iran. So I think that's just a really important way to make sure we end that piece with him, because he's literally one of the biggest pieces of shit you can imagine, like weight-wise and overall just personality. So
people knew that when he was chosen. Bill Barr's reputation has just always been in the gutter. He's been around for a really long time. He's been part of a lot of shady business. Yeah. So, and you know what we're talking about here is a system where the government will be able to do whatever the hell it wants, but nobody else will, right? So these folks will ultimately be placing themselves almost in a sort of class war situation where they're the intelligence class, deep state, whatever you want to call it, that is able to use these technologies without any attacks on them. But you know, everybody else can't use this stuff.
The term intelligence,
as the Stratfor hacks proved, the intelligence class is inclusive to the private space, to the private market. There are you know, publicly funded spy organizations, and there are privately funded spy organizations. And the fact that we have things like fusion centers where it's sort of a meeting of the spies in coordination with private organizations, public intelligence outfits, and local police departments. That's how regular people and activists get fucked with. That's how Black Lives Matter activists get fucked with. That's how student organizers get fucked with. That's how we get fucked with. If you are a private citizen and you want to speak out against your government, no matter where you live, there's going to be a convergence of public and private sector agencies that that set aside their personal differences in order to take you out.
Yeah, and so I have a lot of experience with this sort of dimension of it. It's well known, and you can read about it. And I recommend people who are interested in sort of this intelligence industrial complex, or whatever you want to call it. We're seeing massive growth of private sector military associated, right? Think tanks, intelligence agencies, research and development firms, even sort of more startup-y things. We're seeing a tremendous growth of that. We'll see what happens with the economy tanking right now. But the area to look at in the United States is the area around Washington, of course, but specifically McLean, Virginia, and Tyson's Corner. These places are basically the intelligence agency's version of Silicon Valley. And, you know, it's no coincidence that you have things like, you know, a giant Amazon center being in these areas. You've got all the Boeings, you've got the Booz Allen Hamiltons, you've got MITRE, right? You've got all these groups there. And, you know, I visited quite a few times. I've been to some events down there. It's very interesting. You know, obviously, I haven't been blacklisted or blocked yet, but you know, you can get a real sense of how casual it is. It's just business as usual for these folks. You know, it's not something where everybody sort of has this idea that it's like, you know, seedy spy organization. And no, these people are just going to work every day. They feel like they're going to the office, and then they come home. And I think you get that sense when you listen to people like Snowden, of course, talking about Booz Allen Hamilton, you know, but you don't necessarily get that sense unless you either listen to that stuff or talk to folks involved. You know, you can go to a bar in McLean, Virginia, or, you know, a hotel there and have a conversation with somebody, and you'd be surprised the information they give up, which is why smart journalists spend some time down there. And B, you know, the cavalier attitude towards the things that are being done, the programs that exist and the military developments that are happening is pretty shocking. So yeah, it's worth pointing that out. Another thing is, of course, and this is something that is bothersome to me, but you know, these cybersecurity field, as we now call it, right? It's an actual field, is filled with this sort of military infiltration and intelligence agency infiltration. It goes all the way down to the lingo we use when we're talking about threat modeling and OPSEC and these kinds of things. That's coming from that military group. And, if you're a cybersecurity person and you're looking for work, you will have people reach out to you who are part of these agencies, especially the jobs asking for security clearance, right? And they may be doing it through some startup or through some private entity. And it just goes on constantly here. It goes on in Europe. It goes on in Israel. It
Sounds like a great opportunity for a well-placed mole.
Yeah, hypothetically, I've already
Or
ruined
Flash
myself.
freedom fighter.
I've already ruined myself that way. One can hope. One can hope there are a few. Not that I would ever advocate treason against my government. Okay, on that thought, let's talk a little bit about. I'll re-summarize a little bit, especially for the people just turning into the stream. You've got Section 230. Section 230 allows intermediaries a large amount of leeway as far as not having liability for the content their users post and things people say and things people share on an internet platform, right? On a website, etc. You've had a number of attacks on it over the years of different forms. The two latest attacks are a thing called Earn-It. Earn-It, the main thrust of it is that it attempts to build a basically board of people chosen by Bill Barr and the DOJ. And those people will decide best practices, and only the sites that follow these best practices will have that sort of immunity from the content that their users post. Everybody else is screwed. That threatens to break encryption because you'd have to moderate very strongly, and to moderate very strongly, you'd have to look at the contents of what people are doing. Okay. Now we have something that's even worse, right? And this attack is just extremely brazen, and it just goes to show how there's sort of a two-pronged thing going on. This one's called the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act. So no clever acronym, but it has the word encrypted in it, and it does exactly what it seems to say, except for let's hope it doesn't become lawful. The idea is that basically there will have to be backdoors in all encryption schemes. It requires that the government, a government commission, basically will look at the encryption technology and the encryption implementation that providers put in place. And if they decide that it is technically possible, right, to put a backdoor into that thing, even if Silicon Valley says, hey, it's not technically possible, it would ruin XYZ of what we're trying to do here, it would ruin the actual privacy of our users, et cetera, these folks would say, well, you know what, too bad, then build another version of that implementation. Right, so it gives them the power to literally review your scheme, your implementation of encryption that you have for your users. And if the government decides that they want a backdoor in it, and you say it can't be done the way we're doing it now, they say, too bad, build something else. So it's as bad as it gets, and it goes at the heart of the issue here. Now, for folks unfamiliar with encryption, it's thrown around a lot. Just to talk about one version of it, but the one that's most relevant here, asymmetric encryption, meaning you have two encryption keys, a public one and a private one, right? The public key is the thing that you would share so that people can send you messages, right? So you share it with trusted folks to send you messages. The private one is the one you would never give up to anybody, right? Because if you give that one up, that's the thing that decrypts the messages on your end. That means anybody who has that private key can read your stuff. These backdoors are essentially saying, either we insert some sort of technological lever that makes this scheme weak, right? So we weaken the math, or we weaken the implementation, or some other version of that, so that the two keys aren't actually doing what they say they're doing, and we can break the encryption easily. Or the scheme forces people to share the private key. And if the private key is shared, then basically the government has everybody's keys or has a skeleton key that can be used, for all of its users, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of different ways to do it, but the general idea is if you don't hold on to your private key, right, then you do not have control of your information. End-to-end encrypted services that are serious about this, right, the signals, et cetera, have a number of ways for this to be done so that the service itself cannot see the contents of the communication. If you use GPG/PGP email, right, it's very clear what's going on. You have your private key on your computer. Nobody else has it, right, unless they steal it from you, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of ways in which we know how to do this. It is the thing that powers commerce around the world, right? Which is one of the reasons when this style of encryption was being challenged by the US government in the 80s and 90s. One of the reasons it was made legal to do it, right? They lifted the restriction on what they call export control, was because of banking and commerce. There was an opportunity here for people to make literally billions of dollars off of the internet. So the US government said, well, I guess we better allow this. Now we're in a world where, these companies are established. The way in which they do commerce is established. The way in which users are funneled into very few centralized services and very few providers is pretty well established. So the US government is clamping down. And my fear is actually, not only that this gets passed, but B, that all of the big tech companies just fall in line. And there are a number of different ways they can do so. Like I said, they can weaken the scheme, they can build a purposeful backdoor, they can come up with the most complicated sort of request system they want. But the bottom line is they'd be giving over your data to the US government, either by request or potentially in a dragnet constant surveillance way. So.
Hey, I do have a quick question, if I can, for you.
Yep.
So here in Europe, we had protections for communications between users on phone lines that also applied on the landline internet, right? And they had to respect privacy between communicating users who were working on a landline, and that is why they had this whole signal intelligence program, SIGINT, because wireless communication was available to them. They could intercept it because it did not apply to wireless communication, these privacy rules. So that's why they focused on that. But I wonder, are there any protections in the United States still on phone communications? Because they could technically apply to the internet too, I think, if it's done through landlines.
Yeah, so my understanding is that federal wiretap laws are so undermined by national intelligence frameworks that they're pretty much useless. Potentially, they can protect your communications on a landline and even cell phone communications in some cases from a targeted investigation, let's say a sting operation by the police, a local police department. Potentially. I mean, we know there's a number of different ways where that's circumvented, cell site simulators, et cetera. My understanding is that the feds, it's pretty much hands off. And there are a number of different mechanisms to do that. Just as with the Julian indictment, they sort of choose what they think is going to be the best mechanism for getting the information they want. Of course, we know about the PRISM program and the mass surveillance programs of the NSA, but we also have entire departments of both the NSA and the CIA that are focused on targeted intelligence. And that targeted intelligence has very little limitation if you can prove some sort of national security reason. And the bar for that's really low these days. Characterizing either me or my counterpart somewhere as a national security threat is not very hard. Probably just talking on this stream is enough, right?
Oh yeah, you're well fucked and far from home, buddy.
Right.
I The amount of Kevining that has taken place on this show from like day one, there's been a clear effort to tamp down the success of these vigils. There's a guy in the chat right now who is letting us know just how poorly Twitter has considered us. They won't let us stream on Periscope. We've had to go to DLive and we've had to go to Rockfin. Big shout out to Rockfin, by the way. I think they're a far superior platform to YouTube, but people haven't figured that out yet. So we're still broadcasting on YouTube. I kind of want to circle it back to the indictment, because there was a fantastic Twitter thread that Kevin Gostola, friend of the show, friend of the vigils, excellent reporter from Shadowproof, has a couple of different shows of his own that he does where he highlights whistleblowers. Just a fantastic guy all around. He put out a great thread. There's a deep dive into this. Is there a way for us to see this too while the audience sees it, Sleepy Josh? Nope. Okay. Okay. Well, perhaps that's the route we should go, because I would like the guests to be able to take a look at it too. Okay, this is my fucking computer is not letting me control right click to open the freaking thing.
Yeah, the cloud server is being weird. You have to copy the whole link.
God damn it, Sleepy Josh.
Of course. Well, just a quick comment to Mark then, while we've got the air here. I guess the correct thing the correct framework to put this in, though, where wiretap laws is concerned, is that this may change the way that intermediaries, aka corporations, right, big tech and other organizations, operate so much that it's sort of besides the point whether the wiretapping is allowed. If you are using Microsoft Office and using Office Online, and Microsoft is caching everything in a way that the government can search it whenever they want, Microsoft can search it whenever they want, right? And, I mean, it may be that we don't have to rely on the traditional levers of, wiretapping or indictments or FISA requests for that information to bite someone.
So there have been a few comments about how, well, the DOJ can't add new charges. It's too late in the game for them to add new charges, blah, blah, blah. They're not adding new charges. They're simply expanding the scope of the computer crime conspiracy charge. And that's where all of this comes into play. So we're going to take a look-see. So they've got the most wanted leaks list is contain documents human rights groups, lawyers, historians, journalists, and activists believe the public deserve to read. The most wanted weeks list, that's, again, you've got to put yourself back to like 2011, 2012. Julian was speaking at conferences and discussing this thing, which is something that techies do. They go to conferences and talk. I don't understand why that's so freaking weird. Let me get back over to the thing. Yeah, let's read this out of the indictment. Let's see. Steal and send to WikiLeaks the items on the most wanted leaks list that was posted on WikiLeaks website to embolden potential recruits. Assange told the audience that unless they were a serving member of the United States military, they would have no legal liability for stealing classified information and giving it to WikiLeaks because top secret meant nothing as a matter of law. WLA number 3, that's WikiLeaks associate, is Jacob Appelbaum, digital privacy activist who sometimes represented WikiLeaks at conferences. Jacob Appelbaum was stitched up pretty freaking severely on some trumped up charges. In July 2010, at a conference in New York City of hackers on planet Earth, a WikiLeaks associate urged attendees to leak to WikiLeaks. This is just, hey, look, help us do journalism. Prosecutors added an entire section to part covering Chelsea Manning, and they accused Manning of being part of an alleged conspiracy against Iceland that involved FBI informant Siggy Thordarson, who went by the online name Teenager. Siggy, again, I can't stress this enough, is a certified sociopath, a pedophile, a con artist, and also in the employ of the FBI as an asset. I'm not going to bring up the whole leaks because they're kind of hard to see, or the whole text because it's kind of hard to see and read. But we'll take Kevin's commentary for what it is, because he was one of the people from day one covering what exactly was happening to Chelsea Manning way back as soon as she got arrested. He was there at the trial. Chelsea Manning was confined in jail for about a year, refusing to testify before the grand jury investigating WikiLeaks. This may point to what prosecutors wanted her to testify about, because nowhere in her statement to the military court were bank documents mentioned. Prosecutors claim Assange approved establishment of a relationship between WikiLeaks and LulzSec. Siggy made contact on June 16, 2011. However, Wired reported Thordarson decided to approach members of LulzSec hacking gang and solicit them to hack Iceland government systems. I want to get some thoughts from Mark and from Sean on this real quick, so I will stop the share screen. And just from what we've gone over here first. Jump in, either of you, individually or at once. Let's hear a chorus.
Okay. So I talked about this too, about it supposedly being Assange, even in communication with them. And someone who knows a lot about it, I shouldn't mention his name, but he said at least 14 people had access to the Assange moniker back then. So we can't even be established that it's him at WikiLeaks communicating. And second, Siggy, who was in control of the IRC server, we know he was a liar and like a scam artist, right? And he could have been making it up all along. And I do want to note something quickly about the Sabu thing, because so it had to do with the Stratfor documents. And it was Sabu who suddenly, shortly after he was arrested and became an informant for the FBI, did everything to get into touch with Assange. He kept contacting employees of WikiLeaks. He kept stalking them for Assange please to reply. And he actually tried. He got super angry when the others said we're going to leak documents to WikiLeaks about with the Stratfor documents. We're going to leak them. And Sabu was so angry about that, and he tried to contact WikiLeaks directly and attempted to sell these documents to WikiLeaks. And this is something that's not really mentioned, but he attempted to sell these documents. And the others in LulzSec, they got so angry about that, they decided to leak everything to the platform anyway, for free. That is pretty much what is a better representation of what happened. So that just real quick. And I also want to say something about Chelsea Manning, that is, they said Assange helped her to decrypt hashes. Well, it literally mentions Chelsea Manning using a Linux operating system to get access to the hashes on Windows computers in the military. Now, the encryption is on those Windows computers is it has two parts. The encryption key has two parts, and in the indictment too, it says only one part was delivered to Assange. So even if you and later on he supposedly, by the way, this is we don't even know if it's true, but And he then delivered a message back to Chelsea saying that we were unable to decrypt it. Yeah, but they only received one half of the key in the first place. So nothing of that. There wasn't even delivered a valid hash to Assange. Only one part of the Windows key was delivered to Assange, supposedly. So there had never been any decryption in the first place. Okay, so those two things real quick.
Yeah, so on on that point, first off, I was joking, and maybe I shouldn't, but I don't know what to do anymore these days. But I was joking that the previous indictment, was criminalizing Linux because of the way it's mentioned.
Sure. No, I mean, that's a good joke, and it's also fairly accurate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, right? And the second one is, you're 100% right about that hash, right? The issue is that it sets a very dangerous precedent where, selling mathematically obfuscated information in any form can be spun however the U.S. government wants to for an indictment. How do we even know, as you correctly point out, exactly what went on? If I don't have a copy of the hash and the hash had two parts, and et cetera, for all we know, the whole thing's junk and bogus anyway. And talk about an easy way to do entrapment, right? Give somebody an encryption key that doesn't do anything, and if they try to crack it, then they're in trouble. Or if they even talk about trying to crack it, or if they even talk about the tools that you need to use to crack this kind of key, right? It could be a problem. Beyond that, something, Mark, I'd like a little clarification on. So Siggy's obviously the textbook example of the kind of unhinged individual that the U.S. government does use for informants in a lot of these cases. One of the reasons it's so dangerous for this kind of thing to go on beyond the obvious, other issues. If Siggy had control of the IRC servers, why was Adrian Lamo used as an informant on Chelsea Manning if those IRC chats could have just been leaked by Siggy?
See, and that's the perfect question, I guess. So, and that goes into the thing that we know that this new indictment, already in 2018, Yahoo News posted an article about this, and they were already expecting this to happen, right? And they said, like, we have the DOJ has access to over 100,000 chat logs of these conversations between them, and we're expecting that the DOJ is going to do this new indictment thing. And they were attempting to use Jeremy Hammond, Chelsea Manning as their testimonies, and they both refused. But clearly, they didn't trust Siggy's testimony at all. Like, they would have used him from the start. But it is only now that these other two refused that they're now using Siggy. And the thing is, personally, I think they don't trust him at all. They're using it as a last effort thing, because suddenly they're using him. And we even, like, when this new indictment was released, we even thought they're using Sabu as to testify on this. But it turns out to be Siggy, and that is a very strange thing, especially because, if I'm correct, he was 17 back then. He's not even an adult yet, and. So this is a strange story, yeah, and supposedly they used him. He used to prove that Assange was actually in with him. He uploaded a video on YouTube, and that video showed Assange sitting in the same room. Now, we don't even know when this video was taken, or maybe it was just a video from a long time ago, and he was just using that. So we don't even know that. It is, it's bogus, I think.
So it just seems a little strange to me. Yeah.
And this has been brought up in chat too. But there's another part to this indictment where they're trying to criminalize employees of WikiLeaks for the assistance that was given to Edward Snowden when he was doing the best that he could to not get thrown into a black hole in the US for leaking documents, unfortunately, to The Intercept. And as to As to why he didn't go straight to WikiLeaks with this, I will never fucking know. If anybody has an answer to that, please share it with me. And that the panel, the guests, whomever. But there is an effort to throw more dirt onto Edward Snowden in a part of this too, and it speaks to the level of desperation of the Department of Justice and the Trump administration because this information has been available, at least in the case of Sabu and Siggy, since 2012. In the case of Snowden, it's been available since 2014. If they wanted to bring this information to light, they had plenty of time to do it in the original indictment. Choosing to do it now, when there have been slowly, but definitely with impact, movements growing, not just in the grassroots activist community, but Lissa Johnson and Dr. Spur Assange specifically has really put pressure on the UK government and members of the UK Parliament for a compassionate release for Julian Assange, because he is in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom, stuck 23 and a half hours a day in solitary confinement. When he's with people, he's with at least 4 people in a very cramped space. There is the virus running through Belmarsh prison. People have died from it. They're on a skeleton crew because people have been self-isolating because they either have it or don't want to get it. And that kind of pressure and the awareness that organizations like Action for Assange, yes, but a number of others worldwide, this kind of, I guess, information sharing community that we're a part of has really kind of brought people back into, holy shit, they shouldn't be doing this to this guy. And so now they're trying to, I guess, hide the fact that this is a pure political persecution of an individual, with the end result being the destruction of investigative journalism. And they're trying to focus on these quote unquote cyber crimes. And because people, regular people, including fucking me, don't know a lot about this stuff, people are going to hear, oh, cyber terrorists, that's bad. I don't like that. I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and side with the U.S. government on this one, including every freaking liberal who has been cheering on the Trump administration and the Trump Department of Justice while wearing a pussy hat and saying Orange Man bad. Hope that wasn't too convoluted. It felt convoluted. I'm sorry if that was convoluted.
It's okay. I enjoy the soliloquies, man. It's really needed, seriously. On the subject of Snowden, really quickly, my reading of history and my understanding from what I know is that Snowden wanted to make sure that the information went through more mainstream channels. And understood that contacting folks like Greenwald and Poitras would eventually go to other journalists in more mainstream areas. And it did, right? Barton Gellman and some of these other folks. That all said, everything Snowden did was not perfect. And for example, he famously mailed, hard drives in the mail. I've seen a story, and I have to dig it up to find it. But my understanding is one of these was like hidden in a tree, one of these boxes that was mailed out by Snowden.
Straight up Revolutionary War style, where you stick your message in a hollowed out tree. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, I'm from Connecticut, so I know all about the Charter Oak story. But anyway,
I'm from Indiana, and I know about that, so I'm pretty impressed with my knowledge of U.S. history. Just want to share that with you. I'm doing a great job today.
Nice. So long story short, I actually use some of these cases in class. I talk a little bit about the way in which Greenwald was contacted. Snowden had to teach Greenwald how to use PGP, GPG, right? And there's actually a Vimeo video out there still with Snowden's voice, which I can post in my Twitter feed, I guess, if I find it. I should be able to find it. That's very interesting because it's anonymously uploaded to Vimeo, and it's like a little tutorial on GPG, which is really cool. But long story short, I think there was a sense from Snowden that he wanted to be able to control the process as well. And going to WikiLeaks at that point, I don't think would have allowed him necessarily to do that. Now, who knows? I can't necessarily say. Obviously, it was very important for WikiLeaks to, you know, save his ass basically in Sheremetyenko airport there. And that was extremely important for him to be able to get out and not be apprehended by the US government. So, you know, it's very interesting how history works, isn't it?
Isn't it interesting to kind of have to think this man had to get help for revealing the crime of a government, and it's a crime to reveal that crime. So Edward Snowden revealed that before it was legal to wiretap everyone, we were all being wiretapped, spied on, metadata collected, and then has to flee the country because he showed that illegal things were happening. And that's the basis of literally why we're here. Julian Assange, same way. So the fact that this has to even be brought up in the indictment about literally someone just helping someone reveal that crimes were committed flee is horrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, and it should be, right? And I mean, the other flip side of the coin too is that in both of these cases, these things were relatively open secrets, right? Who knows how many contractors at the time had access to the exact same information that both Bradley Manning, right, and Snowden had. I mean, we're talking about these huge military networks that have tons and tons of people who have access to the information. We're looking at this stuff every day in both of those cases. And, you know, it takes courage to actually blow the whistle, but the secrets were sort of open secrets. You had an entire class of people, again, who had access to this information that the public did not have access to. So it's pretty scary. It goes to show how power works in our world. And the story is a very old one, right? It goes back to much older leaks, right? Pentagon Papers, etc. You know, where similar, at least digital technologies give us this modicum of power, which is one of the reasons that there's been such a hard pushback. Again, I don't want to dominate the stream. I do have one final set of thoughts I want to say about the timing of a few different things. But I'd rather you all get a chance to kind of summarize.
No, I mean, by all means, go ahead.
Okay, so it seems to me that there are a number of things going on in the Trump administration that are happening all at once right now. So as I said, the Earn It or Earn IT Act was, I don't want to say delayed, but it did not move very swiftly. And there were other concerns, clearly, which was the pandemic. Now we're looking at a situation where, as you brought up, the strangeness of the firing, not firing, I didn't fire them situation in the DOJ. That all that stuff that's going on shows to me that there's a tumultuous situation going on in those folks who are at the top echelon of power, right? They're not agreeing with each other. They're trying to push their own agendas through. And Trump himself is facing a situation where, you know, as awful and as, you know, untenable a candidate as Biden is, right? And we all know he's not a very good candidate. It's like you don't even have to explain why. That's how bad he is at just being a politician at this point and forming a sentence. But anyway, it still looks really bad for Trump at the moment. I think there's a real fear amongst the folks who are currently in power that if they don't push through the things that are on their table, on their desk right now, they may never get pushed through. I think that's one of the reasons for the indictment, the new indictment now. I think it's one of the reasons for the new anti-encryption bill. I think we're seeing Supreme Court decisions not go the way the Trump administration expected. We're seeing another extreme anti-immigration measure, right? Trump pushing the moratorium on H-1B and J-1 visas and a couple others until the end of 2020, right? Past the election. We're seeing a number of things sort of coalesce, and I kind of feel like what's going on is they're trying to kill healthcare, of course, what little we have. These things are happening for a reason at this moment, and they're kind of like, they seem like the dying throes of the Trump administration. They may not be. I mean, who knows how things are going to go in November, but they at least are being pushed now for a reason. So.
And so we've had a question similar to this posed a couple times, but why do you think it is that the people that support candidates like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump that are also Julian Assange supporters didn't make larger demands or any demands in regards to this case? And this is, I'd like Mark to actually kick this one off if he could. I think you're muted,
Gonna have
Mark.
to unmute Mark.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was distracted real quick. I was reading through the entire chat.
There's no reading allowed on this program, Mark.
Yeah, we don't read here. Steve's the only one that's allowed to read.
I'm only allowed to read Harry Potter books.
That's fair. But my question, Mark, in the U.S. and in the U.K., there are large amounts of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump supporters that are also Assange and WikiLeaks supporters and basically pro-human liberation advocates. Why do you think those people have let the Assange issue just fall to the wayside when that was one of the things that Trump used to rise to power?
Yeah, that is a kind of a strange story, right? Because like before Trump was president, he was using WikiLeaks over and over again and saying like WikiLeaks is so great. And then suddenly he was a president and said like, yeah, I don't really care about WikiLeaks, right? That they're not in my life, and something like that. He said like they're not a part of my life. I think he literally said. That's why I always have a problem with like the whole partisan politics thing. Like some of these people, I think they're prepared to compromise on some of their ideals to support whatever partisan candidate they're with. And well, as long as a Trump or a Boris Johnson focuses on some other issues which are important to them, they're prepared to just throw away this thing entirely. And that does make me sad, to be honest, because you have to look at the full scope of things, and like the fact that they're supporting you on one thing and they're taking away your rights on the other hand, and especially regarding a free press at this case, like it's happening openly, right? And a person like Trump talks about fake news and destroying fake news, and right now the only so-called fake news we've seen him target is literally WikiLeaks, so to speak. I'm not saying that's fake news, but I mean that's like, it seems like the only media outlet that is getting a lot of firepower on it against it. So that is that's strange, and the supporters of these candidates should realize that seems that they've just been fooled by election rhetoric again, as happens so often, and that when candidates get to power, they will betray them and just move a different path. And so to all these supporters, I would say like you have to think about what's actually going on, and free press is crucial in a democracy, as long as you still call it that. But it is crucial to hold people in power accountable and to get the true picture of things. And if you allow that to be taken away, then you're lost. You're never going to get the real story about whatever candidate you're supporting. And Yeah, so that is my opinion about it. I mean, for the rest, it's just sad. And yeah, but perhaps many of these, so to say, pro-Trump supporters back then were just very happy with the whole DNC stuff. They were happy that Hillary was heard by WikiLeaks and that some emails were exposed. And then when that whole story is over, they don't really care anymore because that specific thing got a lot of mainstream media attention too, and it was actually used in the campaign. And maybe they're not even following what is actually going on right now. Like, yeah.
So our good friend and my little sister Taylor Hudak had like 18 billion questions at the beginning of the show, and I do want to make sure that some of those get covered. One of which being, do you guys like what's the upon reading the indictment, is it not just crystal clear that LulzSec and the AntiSec were FBI led operations?
I don't personally believe that the entire concept of anti-SEC was FBI led, but it is pretty clear now that LulzSec was at that point already FBI led, because Sabu was like at least attempting to put all the attention to him. And that is also then you're also faced with another question: what was the actual reason that all the media was covering this back then? Because all the media suddenly was interested in anonymous, I want to say, like in the hacks by LulzSec, and then you can like argue, yeah, perhaps that because they were already aware Sabu was compromised, that they were already preparing to run with the whole story about finally taking down Anonymous or LulzSec. And they were already preparing for this whole thing. That's why they gave it attention, just like put like a huge bullet into the so-called bullseye of Anonymous. So that's the thing. But the entire anti-hack movement, of course, there's like so many different hacking crews were involved, and some are openly also. That's also important to mention. Some crews in the anti-SEC movement openly distanced from whatever Sabu was doing and what the crew was doing, and that had to do with internal fights, and also some defacements happened. Maybe I should mention Team Poison and their struggle. They defaced the website and actually put out like a whole message against Sabu and LulzSec back then. It is there were always like fights, and the anti-SEC thing, that is like a movement and not like one crew. And the indictment makes it look like it is like one crew ran by Sabu or whatever, but that is not true, of course.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm getting a lot of chatter in the chat. The anti-sec had nothing. It was not FBI led. There are people that are very, very adamant about that.
So my perspective on this, and I think it's important for us to keep a historical perspective. And now I'm a relative outsider. I only know what I see and what I'm told by people I trust. But it seems to me that if we put this in the context of intelligence movements, put this in the context of the way that, social movements, we put in the context in the way that intelligence agencies infiltrate those social movements, right? It seems to me that there are probably way more informers than we'll ever know about that exist. And some of them are revealed through their actions. Some of them start out as informants, back off from some of the stuff they were supposed to do, and then fade into obscurity. So there's a lot of really weird stuff that goes on. It's quite possible that just as FBI, CIA, NSA does things like, especially the FBI, I should say, send agitators to a protest, right? These folks should be looked at from that sort of lens. Yeah, maybe there's a desire, right, to do something like break stuff or whatever that can be easily inflamed, in a group. but the agitator is there to make sure that that happens, or to try to get the folks to do those things so that it's easier to apprehend and stop the movement. So that's sort of my sense of this whole Sabu thing. It seems like there was never really full control over his actions any more than there was full control of any of the folks involved in these sort of sordid stories, right? And that's just the way it works. And it's really unfortunate because you have to constantly be looking over your shoulder, but even having an understanding of trust and threat models and things like that doesn't necessarily help. So.
Yeah, and you see it again right now. You're saying like the media benefits from pushing some kind of narrative that there is like an official thing within Anonymous, and that this is like the core of everything, and we take that out, and everything is lost, everything is destroyed. Full Anonymous is infiltrated, and right now you see it again, like with the whole Black Lives Matter protest and the support coming from Anonymous for these protests. The media immediately started to cover it like, Anonymous is back, and the official Anonymous Facebook page released a message and against the police department, and the official page did this and this, calling for action. Yeah, but everyone already knows there isn't any official Facebook page for Anonymous. There are thousands and thousands of Facebook pages and thousands of Twitter accounts. And so immediately they're already looking for a bullseye, and it's very possible that at some point, maybe months from now, they will going to arrest whoever is behind that Facebook page and say like, we finally got Anonymous again. And second,
the CEO of Anonymous put out a press release asking for all of the members to act in a certain way. Did you miss that press release that they put out?
Yeah, like whoever is CEO today did that, right? I mean, like, that's the thing, and that's what they actually actively use against us, and that is, but there's nothing true about that, of course. I mean, you have Anons in countries like the Philippines and Nepal, and they don't even probably aren't even aware of this, because it's just not, like, it's just like, how many politicians can we name from such countries, and do we expect them to be able to name our politicians or politicians in the US? Like, they're just not interested in it, and many of them don't even speak the language, English. So this thing is just a method of protest, anonymity, and that's what I used before too. But they're obviously always interested in creating some kind of spokesperson, some kind of bullseye, and they did that back then, and they do it again now. There will be also, like, okay, there's many Anons in support of the whole Black Lives Matter thing, but there's also many Anons who are not in support of it, and it's their own decision to support whatever they want. I mean, it's up to them. So, yeah.
And traditionally, the power is in folks, either the mass of folks not getting prosecuted, or the mass of folks not turning each other in, I should more properly say. So, yeah, I mean, you can't stop it if enough people are brave enough, and that's what we rely upon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Generally in movements. I just want to say about the Black Lives Matter thing, something worth noting. There are a lot of Instagram influencers, right, who are now currently being sort of propped up by media as the heads of these movements, or as the heads of a specific group, or whatever the situation is. You know, we may find out in, 10, 20 years who was an informant and who wasn't, and who was reached out to be an informant, et cetera, et cetera. Gloria Steinem was famously a CIA agent and didn't see any conflict between her work as an informant and her work for what she considered a movement. Even when you look at Adrian Lamo, you have this sort of thing, right? He justified it to himself, saying, everything was great about what was going on except for this. This was going too far. You know what I mean? So the government relies on this sort of thing, and they're going to keep relying on it. And they even get the bonus that when these folks are revealed, everybody shits their pants, rightfully so. And it creates derision and mistrust in the movements that exist. How do you know that the person you're working with is not going to turn you in? So,
the term I like to use for that specific instance, as you summarized there, is trauma. They literally create trauma within an organization or an ideological group of people or within a movement to have it begin then fracturing in and of itself, because you don't have to rip the whole thing down. You just have to blow the core up enough that the rest of it just floats apart.
Right.
And that's the strategy that they try to use.
And trauma's the correct term, I'm sure. Yeah, you're 100% right on that. So
People have gotten big mad at me when I've told them that Gloria Steinem was a CIA asset, and like she brags about it in interviews and in a book that she wrote. You know, like it's not a big secret. It's just she personally waited 30 or 40 years to out herself, even though she had already previously been outed a number of times. And it's one of my favorite points to make in terms of, like, you know, who's working against you inside of your movement. The thing that you've got to remember if you're an activist and you are not an asset of an intelligence agency is that, you know, keep that not just to yourself, but like remember it over and over again. You are doing something that is outside of yourself for a good reason, and you are not seeking to undermine your fellow brothers and sisters and everyone in between inside that organization. There's always going to be some co-opting from the predator class. The predator class is always going to send agents provocateurs into your movement as it becomes successful. That's not a thing that you can get away from. But there are a number of ways that you can counter it, and one of those certainly is not engaging in like interpersonal trauma, or, you know, people are going to start shit. Ignore that shit. When people come to smear you, ignore that shit. You are a better person than the person smearing you. Just want to remind people of that.
yeah, we hope. It's hard not to do personal attacks, right? Or engage with them. And
it is so fucking frustrating.
yeah, I know.
The amount of shit that like just I could say back is substantial, but I don't.
Yeah.
Let me fucking tell you.
Well, we may as well wrap.
So, real quick, I'm not sure about this, but this just came through in our group chat talking. Josh found this. It looks like it's 404, the Freeing Julian Assange Part 3 article on the ContraSpin website.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, and while I've got Mark here, what happened to Legion Coin, man?
Oh yeah, X is working on it. He set his profile to private now. I'm kind of waiting for his updates on that. So that some sites were down too.
The link for that is 404 too, and I fucking paid decent money for a Raspberry Pi just so I could start my little adventure into fucking cyber or cryptocurrency.
Yeah. No, I have to ask him what is up with that. He put on a message on his Twitter that he was going dark for a while, I think.
Good
Sorry
dog.
for my dog.
Good dog.
He is a good dog.
Sure, maybe he will be back again, X. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. He's always been into that whole crypto thing, and I think he seems to love it. So I was suggesting to him that we could actually use it perhaps to help with arrested activists. Like some people who are scared to have their identities known by certain people, that they could actually help, like, for example, arrested activists and donate in crypto to some lawyers, perhaps helping these activists. So yeah, that's the thing. I liked the Legion Coin idea. We have to wait for X, I guess. I mean, he'll be back.
Yeah. I think that was most everything we had to touch on today. We're kind of coming up at the top of the hour here, so I want a chance for everyone just to kind of to chit chat here for a little bit and give some final thoughts. If you could, if you could, Sean, dive in, let people know final thoughts, and then where people can find you.
Very cool. Yeah, so I guess my final thoughts are we're in for a roller coaster in the next few months. I'm glad that the thing that brought us together was, or that we're brought together, but the thing that brought us together was obviously bad, the indictment. It is really a testament to Julian's strength that he's been able to keep it together for this long. I kind of feel like whatever indictment is thrown at him, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but in a sense, it kind of doesn't because of the difficulty he's having even making arguments or talking to his lawyer, etc. And this could be seen as a sign that they're getting a little desperate. As you mentioned, they had this in the pipeline, and now it's like their plan C or something that they're using. So that may be kind of an encouraging thing. We're seeing a lot of really positive change. It's really inspiring. One of the things that's going on, of course, is that's put an immense amount of pressure and workload on a lot of the activists who are out there really affecting change. And we've got to do our best to keep our eyes on the prize, not forget about things like, Julian being in a hole in Belmarsh and under real threat from things like COVID and so on. I appreciate being here. We'll see what happens. Hopefully we don't have to do these vigils in another year, right? But I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about anyway. So, as far as finding me, probably the best thing I want to plug right now, we're doing a bunch of digital self-defense classes through a site called privacysafe.tech. We've done 2 sort of open houses. I'll be posting the videos publicly for those shortly. I want to say tomorrow, but we'll see. Under promise, over deliver. And we did our first real deep dive into digital self-defense last night. So the classes are what I call drop-in sessions. They're approximately 3 hours long, but with breaks, right? And I take a very sort of personalized approach to security. As I mentioned before, this is not, I don't really like a lot of the militaristic, jargonistic cybersecurity stuff that's out there. I care about personal autonomy, right? I care about movements and what the solutions are for activists and those kinds of use cases. So if you're interested in dropping in, getting some information that can help you in your movement, in your organizing, but also just in your daily life, sign up, join, become a member. We're adding new classes and some new instructors as well. That's privacysafe.tech. And the next class is in a week and a half. So.
And Mark, make sure you plug the ABB show as well.
Yeah, let me just start out with that. The quickest thing is to because we're dealing with a lot of censorship, etc. Right. So the quickest thing is to just search for Anonymous Bites Back on YouTube, on Twitter, on Periscope. Is there even a search button there? Well, so you just search for Anonymous Bites Back. And on Twitter we have an ABB live show, and that's the quickest thing to find us, and you'll find all the work we do. Like we broadcast at least once a week, but sometimes more. We have like an Asia show on Sunday, focused on stuff that's happening in Asia, especially Hong Kong. So yeah, this is just Anonymous Bites Back. And what I think about what is going to happen in the future. I like the whole the latest events in the United States. There's a lot of protests going on, and it gives us an opportunity to put some attention on the obsession with national security and the obsession with having these police being militarized and being authoritarian again towards normal people. And the thing is that they've like over the last few decades they've been like militarizing this whole police system and like distancing themselves from like the normal people. And it's almost like we have to agree with all these new restrictions, privacy restrictions, the whole creation of this surveillance system, and we all have to agree on it. But right now we have some kind of like wake up call going on, and I think if this whole movement especially in the United States goes on, then we can use this as an opportunity to speak out about those things. And because most of these people, I think, will agree to that something is very wrong right now our societies are kind of like we're losing freedoms that have been fought for in some cases hundreds of years. And about Assange, I think this indictment is this is not going to change much. This is very weak. It's old information. Already in 2018 was written about, and it can easily be discredited. And they shoot themselves in the foot by literally listing the fact that Sabu, for example, was already under FBI control even before any of the communication started. So I don't expect too much from that. But I am hopeful. I mean, people are really talking about all these things now, and that is something positive. And I do also I do want to mention I was impressed by the videos by your colleague Taylor. She was one of the only people to actually mention the fact that anti-SAC was not a group but an actual movement in her videos, and so I should mention that too. I mean, if people are interested in getting some information, perhaps look into these videos. I mean,
and we had that in the queue for today. We didn't get to it, but we have Taylor's permission to play it, and we've got Activism Munich's permission to play it. So perhaps we'll just throw it up after we close out, and if anybody wants to hang out in the chat for an additional 7 minutes, you can. I highly recommend that you watch that. Taylor has just been fucking crushing it the last several months with Activism Munich.
And speaking of Taylor and Anonymous Bites Back, I want to give a big thank you to you, Mark, for actually getting Taylor and I to meet together for the very first time on Anonymous Bites Back, which led to the creation of this here. So we owe you a lot of credit for literally everything that we have started since that interview. So thank you very, very much for bringing us two people together.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, you guys have been doing a great job. I mean, it's been growing so fast, and these shows are really getting a lot of attention. So, and you're giving some great information that's necessary for the people. I mean, who else is doing it, right? I mean, there's not so many of these broadcasts going on about the subject of Assange, at least in the non-partisan way, like you guys are doing it. So, yeah. I'm happy with that, and I'm glad you guys have made it so successful, I guess.
Well, cool. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. My name's Andrew Smith. You can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. And you can find our weekly calls to action. We put them up on our website, action4assange.com. We also link them in the chat. And as well, we have a GoFundMe that we ask if you can't donate to help circulate. And this is to help us organize the 3-week protests in DC in September around Julian's court trial. So yeah, thank you guys very, very much for tuning in. And I appreciate both of our guests for joining us today.
My name's Steve Poikin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find that by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar on YouTube. You can also find me on Rockfin and DLive, which I suggest you do. I want to thank Rob Juno for the super chat for the earlier in the show. We love you, Rob, and everyone in the chat crew. You guys are fucking amazing. It blows my mind that there can be 40, 50, 60, 70 people in a chat and nobody is like sniping at each other or going at it. It's just a giant cuddle puddle, and I appreciate it like every single time. I really do. Big thanks to Mr. Sean O'Brien and to Mark Lubers. My co-host Andrew Smith, Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos, and Mean Panda for the graphics. We love you guys very, 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 very much. And yeah, we will see you Tuesday for the kickoff of Action for Assange's 1 year anniversary of doing these vigils. We've got some incredible guests lined up. And on Friday, July 3rd, in celebration of Julian's birthday, after we go out and do our independent actions, we are going to have a special live stream. If you are part of our Discord and you would like to be on the live stream with us, just hanging out, talking shit, celebrating Julian's birthday, let us know in the Discord. We're happy to have you. Both of you gentlemen that are here as guests today, also welcome to come on. We would like it to be a big ass party. So please do that. We'll throw the link for the Discord in the chat. You can also contact us directly. I am on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. And yeah, till next time, y'all. Good luck to us all.
And I suppose to some degree that's the case, whether they're on the right or the left. And
Oh, this isn't the right video. I feel like it always does Jordan Peterson to us. Like, I think that's happened to us like 2 other times where we've had like end caps where we were going to do something. It's like, here's fucking Jordan Peterson. Like, go clean your room. He reminds me of my dad. He's like, the world does need saving, Andrew, but you got to do the dishes. Can you take us live so we can mention it? That we can't do it? Okay. Oh. Yeah, so the video doesn't want to play for anyone who noticed and anyone that's still listening. It wants to just literally play a Jordan Peterson video for us. So we're going to circle back to this and we will play it with Ray McGovern on Tuesday when we have him on. Should we tell him about our super special guest, Steve, or should we wait?
No, we should not do that. And,
Okay.
And we should have the fuck Sabu as our end screen for every single vigil from now on.
I like it. I think it's high quality. But cool. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.